So, um, think about the ground beneath your feet right now.
Yeah.
It feels like it's shifting, doesn't it? You walk into work, you scroll through your feed, you sit in one of those mandatory meetings, and you get this gnawing sensation that the rules of gravity have just changed.
Like things don't make sense anymore.
Exactly. But the source we are diving into today, it says the ground isn't just shifting, it's actually collapsing.
Collapsing into a void. And the author argues that this is deliberately, strategically engineered.
It's a terrifying image to start with, honestly, but it really captures that specific feeling, that sense that the civilization your forefathers carved out of chaos, the structures that keep the lights on, are being dismantled.
Brick by moral brick.
Right. And he argues it's being done by a force that masquerades as compassion, but acts like acid.
It's a heavy opening, but I mean, it sets the stage perfectly for what is honestly one of the most provocative deep dives we've ever done on this show.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at an ebook called The Final Truth, Understand Her Nature by Conrad Riker, released in 2025. And look, we cover a lot of sources, a lot of literature, but Riker is absolutely adamant that this isn't just a book.
No, he calls it a weapon.
A weapon, a manifesto, and an autopsy of the modern malaise.
It is ultra long, it is incredibly incisive, and honestly, it's fascinating. Especially for those of you out there who follow the manosphere or consider yourselves, red-pilled. We are going to unpack concepts from the text, like the gynocentric sabotage, the woke mind virus, and the author's exact roadmap for reclaiming the masculine spirit.
And understanding the history of our institutions before they were, as he puts it, captured by feminists and Marxists.
Right. But before we descend into that abyss, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like and subscribe button. Seriously, help the algorithm find other truth seekers who need to hear this discussion. We are fighting an uphill battle against the code, and your click is the ammunition.
And just a quick note up front, Riker is very clear that his text is a manual for survival. He says, if you want to understand the biological reality behind the chaos you see in the courts, in HR departments, in universities, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and buy The Final Truth immediately.
Yeah, you really do. This deep dive is for the lions, not the sheep. So let's get into the diagnosis here. The central premise of Riker's book is that Western civilization is under siege.
But he insists this isn't an accident.
Right, it's not just times changing.
No, he calls it a strategy. He introduces this core concept right away called institutional inversion.
Let's unpack that.
So historically, institutions, a corporation, a university, the state itself, were what he calls cathedrals of competence. They were hierarchies based strictly on merit. You rose because you were the best at the job.
You built the bridge stayed up, you got promoted.
As simple as that.
And his argument is that this fundamental law of physics has been completely flipped.
Inverted, that's the word he uses. These institutions have been desecrated by what Riker terms the high priests of equity. The goal of a company is no longer profit or excellence.
It's the management of feelings.
Exactly.
He tells this story in the book that really stuck with me. It illustrates this perfectly. The story of Mike.
Oh, the welder. Yes.
We need to talk about Mike because I think a lot of you listening are going to see yourselves in this guy. Mike is a master welder, 30 years of experience. Riker actually describes his work as structural jewelry.
Which is a great phrase.
It is. It shows how precise he is. He's fusing steel beams that literally hold up the world. He is the archetype of competence. He speaks the language of steel and fire.
A clear example, according to the book, of the masculine drive to order chaos. He builds things that last. He deals in reality. Because if he makes a mistake, people die.
Right. But in Riker's narrative, Mike gets forced into early retirement. And it wasn't because his hands shook or his eyesight went bad. So why was the most competent man in the building pushed out?
Because he refused to attend a mandatory sensitivity training seminar.
Led by a 24-year-old HR coordinator.
With a degree in gender studies.
That stark contrast, the man who builds the building versus the person who critiques his language while standing inside the shelter he provided. That is the heart of this institutional inversion.
Riker calls it the apotheosis of mediocrity. He argues that the system purges the competent man, the one who actually keeps the building standing, to satisfy the emotional requirements of the administrative class.
The welder is disposable.
But the sensitivity trainer is essential. And that, he says, is a civilization in free fall.
Now, Riker connects this phenomenon directly to what he calls the Marxist virus. But he frames it a bit differently than your standard political commentary.
Yeah, he doesn't treat it as just politics, he treats it as a theology.
A mimetic parasite.
Right. Think about the religious parallels the book draws. In this modern leftist worldview, privilege isn't just an economic advantage.
It's original sin.
It's a stain on your soul that you cannot wash away because of how you were born. You can only confess it endlessly.
So checking your privilege is essentially entering the new confession booth.
Exactly. And intersectionality becomes the hierarchy of saints. The more victim points you have, the higher your moral authority.
And cancellation.
Cancellation is excommunication. If you violate the dogma, you are cast out of the village. You lose your banking, your job, your reputation.
It's a cult masquerading as sociology. But then Riker goes even deeper into the psychology of the workplace, specifically regarding HR and the managerial state. He has this theory called the uterus vacuum.
That is a very jarring term.
It sounds aggressive. What exactly is the book getting at there?
It is definitely one of the more controversial arguments in the text, but he roots it in biology. Riker argues that biology doesn't care about your career aspirations. He claims that when you have a class of women who fail to fulfill their biological destiny as mothers, they experience an existential void.
And how does that bleed into the workplace?
Well, the book says they attempt to fill this abyss by treating the corporation or the state as a surrogate child. So the office effectively becomes a nursery.
Which explains the managerial state.
Or the nanny state, yeah. They micromanage grown men like toddlers with safety regulations, tone policing, speech codes. It's a fundamental shift from merit, which Riker notes is dangerous, competitive, and sharp-edged to agreeableness.
And he cites standard psychological data on this, right? The big 5 personality traits.
Yes, he relies on established psychological frameworks here. Women generally score higher in the trait of agreeableness. Riker argues that high agreeableness is great for maintaining a peaceful family or a cohesive village.
But terrible for conquering a continent.
Or building a skyscraper. Or innovating in a cutthroat market.
Because innovation often requires being highly disagreeable. You have to tell people they are wrong, have to break things to build better ones.
Exactly. Riker's point is that when you prioritize culture fit and psychological safety over competence, you are hiring for obsolescence. You create a state of hysteresis.
Define that for us. Hysteresis.
In physics, it's a lag between cause and effect. In the context of the book, it's a lag where the institution can no longer return to competence because it has been fully captured.
The mechanism for self-correction is gone.
Right. The competent men, like Mike the welder, have been fired. The immune system is destroyed.
Which brings us to the mechanism of how this control is actually enforced. Because it's not just about hiring policies. It's about how conflict is handled. The book draws a very hard line between male conflict and female conflict.
This is critical for understanding his concept of the gynocentric sabotage. Male conflict, historically speaking, is direct. It's governed by rules. Duels, wars, boxing matches, even a heated debate in a boardroom.
It's violent, yes, but it's honest.
It's I win, you lose, and then we shake hands.
Whereas female conflict, according to Riker,
is relational aggression. It's covert. Gossip, social exclusion, reputation destruction. It's the Mean Girls clique writ large on a societal level. And the book points to the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial as the ultimate case study of this.
Man, that trial was a spectacle. But why does the author single that out as the turning point?
Because he says it was the solipsistic prison breaking open for the whole world to see. He calls it the listen and believe pathology. You had a man whose career was destroyed instantly by a gynocentric mob before a single fact was verified.
It was purely based on an accusation.
Yes. The feeling of the victim trumped the reality of the events.
But the trial exposed it. The cameras were in the courtroom.
It did expose it. It showed the world what Riker calls the difference between the sepulcher of logic and the solipsistic prison. When facts were finally introduced, cross-examination, audio recordings, timelines, the narrative collapsed.
But Riker warns us that the damage to the culture was already done.
Precisely. Depp won the legal case, but the mechanism of guilt by accusation is still the gold standard in HR departments everywhere.
And a huge part of that damage is done through language. The author calls it the gaslight protocol. This is something I think every single listener has felt in their bones.
This is where we start moving toward the solution he offers, the trivium. But first, you have to recognize the weapon being used against you. The establishment uses linguistic warfare. They change definitions in real time.
Like the definition of equity. Most people hear that word and think fairness.
Riker says you need to look closer. He defines equity in the book not as fairness, but as state-sanctioned theft from the competent to the incompetent.
It is the equality of outcome, enforced by tyranny.
Or look at the Amy Coney Barrett hearings he brings up.
Oh, that was Orwellian revisionism in real time.
Absolutely. Barrett used the term sexual preference. Within hours, Merriam-Webster literally changed the dictionary definition of sexual preference to label it offensive just to support a political narrative that she was a bigot.
The matrix of lies.
That's what he calls it. If words have no fixed meaning, you cannot debate. If you cannot debate, you cannot resist.
So how do you fight a mist that keeps changing shape? Riker says you need a sword, and that sword is the trivium. Now, I've heard this term in classical education circles, but Riker applies it a bit differently.
He says we need to master this to survive. The trivium is the ancient method of learning that the West was built on. Grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Riker says men must master this to autopsy these cultural narratives.
Break them down for us. How does a listener use this tomorrow when he's sitting in one of those sensitivity trainings?
First is grammar, and he doesn't mean commas and syntax. He means defining terms, freezing definitions so they cannot be manipulated. When someone says patriarchy, you force them to define it concretely.
Because usually they can't.
Right. They use it as a floating signifier for everything bad. So you pin it down, you ask, what specifically do you mean by that word?
You refuse to proceed until the terms are set in stone. Stop the slippery language.
Correct. Then there is logic. This is the mechanics of non-contradictory reasoning. This separates truth from falsehood. If A equals B, it cannot also equal C. You use this to dismantle their arguments.
So if they claim diversity is our strength, but the data shows cohesion actually drops, you point out the contradiction.
Exactly. And finally, rhetoric.
Which he defines as the ability to speak with aggressive clarity. I really like that phrase. It implies you stop apologizing.
It's not about being polite anymore, it's about being precise. Riker says men have been conditioned to soften their language to avoid upsetting the uterus vacuum. The trivium demands you stop doing that.
You use language like a scalpel.
You don't just critique the modern malaise, you dissect it. You expose the biological underpinnings.
Let's look at some more of those dissections. The book covers some specific case studies that really highlight this conflict between hysteria and biological reality. We talked about Depp, but what about the Mattress Girl saga?
Emma Solkovich at Columbia University.
Right.
Riker calls this grotesque theater. You had a student carrying a mattress around campus to symbolize a rape that, according to the university's own investigation and all the exonerating evidence, did not happen in the way she claimed.
Yet she was treated like an absolute saint.
Canonized by the media, she even got an art credit for the whole stunt. Riker uses this to illustrate what he terms the legalistic leash.
Where feelings are used to trump facts in the legal and social systems.
It didn't matter what the evidence said. It only mattered what the narrative felt like. It was a performance of victimhood, and that performance was valued higher than the objective truth.
And then there's the science angle. The book brings up the gender equality paradox. This one usually shocks people who buy into the mainstream narrative.
He cites the Stowett and Geary study from 2018. Riker presents it as a dagger through the heart of the blank slate theory.
What did the study find?
It found that in the most egalitarian societies on Earth, places like Norway and Sweden, where you have maximum freedom, heavily subsidized childcare, total social safety nets, women naturally drift away from STEM fields.
Wait, really? Because the narrative we are always fed is that if we just remove the societal barriers, women will naturally rush into engineering.
But the data says the exact opposite. When you remove the economic necessity, when you take the boot of survival off their necks, people revert to their biological programming.
So women drift toward caregiving, healthcare, the humanities.
People-oriented things. Meanwhile, men dominate engineering and the trades thing-oriented things even more heavily than they do in less equal countries.
So Riker's argument here is that biology is totally immutable.
Yes. You can legislate opportunity, but you cannot legislate preference.
That flies in the face of everything we're told in corporate training. We're constantly told that if we just have enough programs and diversity initiatives, every field will eventually be 50-50.
And Riker says that is a fundamental lie. That is the apotheosis of mediocrity, trying to force an unnatural sameness on humanity. Just look at what happened to James Damore at Google.
The Google memo guy.
Right. All Damore did was suggest, using data and logic, which Riker classifies as the masculine approach, that maybe the gender gap in tech is partly due to these biological preferences and not just rampant systemic sexism.
And the response he got was not a debate.
No, it was a total moral panic, pure relational aggression. He was fired not for being factually wrong, but for being a heretic against the gynocentric mob.
It proved Riker's exact point.
In the corporate harem, facts are treated as hate speech if they contradict the feelings of the collective.
So we have the diagnosis now, institutional inversion. We have the mechanism, which is relational aggression and linguistic warfare. And we have the proof from these case studies. The obvious question for the listener is, what does a rational man do about it? And Riker doesn't mince words here. He talks about the Apollonian Restoration and MGTOW.
MGTOW, men going their own way. Now, usually the mainstream media paints this as a bunch of bitter guys hiding in a basement.
But Riker frames it completely differently,
He calls it a rational economic decision.
like an investor pulling his capital out of a bad market.
Exactly like that. He calls it a strategic withdrawal. It's like going Galt in Atlas Shrugged. Riker asks the reader to look at the ledger. If the cost of entry to the sexual marketplace, the risk of divorce, the asset stripping, the loss of custody, the potential for false accusations, if all of that exceeds the value, the rational actor simply opts out.
So it's not misogyny, it's math.
It's pure self-preservation. But he goes further than just opting out. He talks about building the stoic bastion. Men need to become a fortress against the mob. And he introduces a tactic he calls the stone face.
How does that work in practice?
When the mob screams at you, when the bossy woman in HR tries to use relational aggression to shame you into compliance, you do not react. You do not explain yourself.
You do not apologize.
Never. Silence is power. Silence is the rhetorical equivalent of a nuclear void. If you react, you confirm their reality. You give them the energy they're feeding on.
But if you stare at them with the stone face,
Their universe collapses. Because they aren't getting the emotional feedback loop they require to maintain dominance.
he also mentions the digital monk strategy. This was fascinating because it touches on the younger generation, the Zoomers.
He observes that young men, Zoomers, are actively rejecting soy culture. They're using video games and the internet not just as mindless escapism, but as training grounds for hierarchy and competition.
Things the real world has basically outlawed.
Right. Riker sees this not as wasted time, but as a dormant army preparing for the return of reality.
And that reality involves building a parallel society. This is the part of the book that felt the most constructive to me. It's not just a message to give up.
No, the message is build better. This is the Renaissance he talks about. We can't save the captured institutions. Riker says we must practice gynocentric divestment.
Let the bunnerized institutions rot.
Let them hire for agreeableness until they literally collapse under their own incompetence.
And in the meantime,
We build new structures.
Yeah.
Masculine structures. Places where HR is banned outright. Places where excellence is the only law. He points to the manosphere platforms like Rumble, Substack, the Joe Rogan Experience as the new agora.
the new public square where the trivium is still practiced.
It's a call to dominate the chaos, not retreat from it. Riker says the spell of ignorance is broken. We know how the trick works now.
That's the key, isn't it? Once you see the Gaslight Protocol in action, you can't unsee it. Once you understand that equity really means theft, you stop nodding along in the corporate meeting.
You can't unsee it. And that leads to the ultimate choice Riker presents at the end of the text. We are standing at a precipice. On one side is the demise of standards, the gray, egalitarian wasteland where everyone is equal simply because everyone is equally miserable and incompetent.
And on the other side,
A renaissance of the West, fueled by unbridled masculine spirit.
it is not a polite book. It is not a safe book.
No, it is a declaration of war on the woke mind virus.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought. Riker leaves the reader with a stark warning. He says, if you are looking for comfort, go back to the sepulcher of logic. But if you are ready to be a lion and look into the abyss, this is your manifesto.
The abyss is looking back, and for the first time in a long time, men are staring it down without blinking.
If you are ready to take that red pill, you know what to do. We've only scratched the surface of the history and the strategy contained in this text. You really need to read the full thing. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and buy The Final Truth, Understand Her Nature by Conrad Riker. The reviews are absolutely crucial to fighting the algorithm, so leave a 5-star rating if you agree with the mission.
And don't just read the book. Join the counter-revolution. Follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. That's where you'll find the unfiltered commentary that they won't let him print in the mainstream press.
That is where the real conversation is happening. You can also find him on Twitter at Conrad Riker and on YouTube at Conrad Riker. Get plugged into the network. Do not remain isolated.
The truth is out there, but you have to be willing to fight for it.
That's it for this deep dive. Like, subscribe, and stay rational out there. We'll see you in the parallel society.
Stay strong.